Hello viewers, today we're going to be servicing a Holmes oscillating pedestal fan. This is the Holmes HASF-1506 electric fan, 16 inches, 120 volts, 60 hertz, 0.8 amps, AC only. I've showed these on video on my channel several times. This was a model I was looking out for my collection because I forget which grade it was, but one of my middle school classrooms had, actually two of them had these. One of them had this model in white, and the other classroom had another one that was in black, and that one was all busted up. It was missing the front guard and whatever, but they still used it. But this is the one I remember the most. And this one, I finally got one that has a good blade. I think this is the third one I have now. One of them was sent in by a viewer. The other one I found at the Habitat. And this one, I had to pay a fortune to get this one sent in, but I did. And it's in really great condition. Hardly anything is yellowed. The blade looks good, so it was worthwhile. I've never serviced one of these before, so this will be a bit of a learning curve. Very interested to see what the motor looked like, because to me it seems like it's not a regular size motor, but I've been told that it is. So to start with, there's one of those pesky screw things here on the bottom of the cage. I'll move the camera in a minute. I'm going to put it up on the table for this part. There's a screw there which we have to undo in order to take the guard off. There's a nut on the other side which I'm holding, or a bolt rather, and no, it is a nut. I always get that confused. There's a nut on the other side. I'm holding that to keep it in place so that the screw threads. I'm going to take it off just to the end of the nut. I'll leave the nut on the screw, and that'll give us enough release to be able to pull this apart and then push the guard through. Classic. Okay, so we have a bunch of tabs around the guard. Here's one of them. Here's another. Push these down and back to the other side of the guard. And then once you get about halfway through, it should just start to come off. This is reverse threaded. I always thought this was kind of a cool looking blade set with the way this is like a continuous piece. It's pretty tight on there. It shouldn't be. Huh. Okay. Well, usually this just pulls off easily, but of course because the camera's on, it's going to be difficult. It's kind of moving it back and forth a bit to let it slide down the shaft. I think the blade is warping a little bit. It should probably be more, kind of more like that, but it doesn't seem to have warped enough to be interfering with the performance, because it's not to the point where the leading edge is in front yet, but it should definitely be more like that, I think. Alright, so we got 3 screws here to release the front cover off of the motor. Now, I don't know how this thing doesn't overheat, because there's hardly any ventilation here, because these plastic vents are not aligning with the metal vents on the motor, and the blade covers this whole entire thing, so where is the air going through the motor? Okay, and now the switch should just kind of pull up and off. If the oscillation knob was there, it would do the same thing, but it's busted off of this one. And there's one more screw on the back. Is. That's a pretty small motor compared to you know, some of the other Holmes models, or the Lasco models. They're usually longer. This, I don't know, to me it's a pretty short motor for a 16-inch fan. Alright, I'm going to take this off the stand now. I'll move it to the bench. Just make it easier for the servicing if it's not on the stand. Alright, so we have, it's like a pretty good design as far as the safety of the wire is concerned during oscillation. It's enclosed in a little jacket there, which is very sticky. I suspect this probably runs really hot. I mean, there's really no indication of it doing that other than this turning sticky. Yeah, because it's not sticky at the bottom, but it's stickier on the motor. So this, I think this thing probably runs very hot. I don't know, it's a weird design. So the first thing we got to do is we got to tap out this little thing on the shaft there that lines up the blade. So I'll take a screwdriver and put that there, and then we'll just tap it out. Starting to go, just being a little bit pesky. Okay, and then once it goes through, I'll take a little pointing thing and try to push it the rest of the way through. This is being really pesky here. There it goes. Okay, so that's that. We want to make sure the shaft is clean at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on and just kind of go through here with a cloth to clean it. Get a nice clean surface there. Looks good. Well, there's a little bit of rust here. I can't see that. There's a little bit of rust, so I'm going to grab some sandpaper and I'm going to file that down. Actually, I don't know where my sandpaper is, so I'll use these little filing sticks here. It should work. to get that rust off, because it'll damage the shaft or the bearings as you pull them off. I don't have any rust on there. Alright, that should be good. We got a pretty nice clean surface there. If that gives us any trouble, I'll have to get find the sandpaper. Okay, so now we're going to split the motor open. There's 4 screws around the outside of the motor that we're going to undo. Now that those screws are removed, the front shell here, well actually this is going to be a little bit difficult because the front shell is stuck to the housing and the rear shell is stuck to the stator. So we're going to have to also remove this, where I disconnect this oscillating thing here. And this screw is reverse threaded as well. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll take this off like this. So you got to be very careful not to scratch the windings at all. You know, anything abrasive to contact them. Take the shaft out. Just sticking for some reason. All the grease in the oscillation box is kind of dried out. What that is, like, some kind of spider egg or something in there. That's nasty. Let's take a quick look at the back and make sure it's pretty clean. It is, so I'm not even going to mess with that. This definitely runs hot. Everything is kind of a little bit crusty in here, but it's still in working order, so it's fine. Okay, now we're going to oil it. And for that, what we're going to do is there's a wick inside there in between the bearings. So that kind of like light brown colored material. We're going to put a lot of oil on there. Now it looks like it's relatively damp still, so that's good. It seems like it came with enough lubrication from the factory that it's maintained over all these years. But we had a couple fresh straps, and the fan was nowhere near locking up. It really wasn't in desperate need of being lubricated, but I do want to add a little bit of fresh oil in here. Just put a couple drops onto that wick. Do the same thing in the front. And I'll just let that sit for a minute to soak in. The oil has seeped in, so now what we're going to do is we'll put a little bit of oil on the shaft as we slide it back in. It's pretty clean, but we'll just give it a quick wipe down and get any old oil off. It's not bad. Not a lot, because it'll spill just a little bit. You could put some on there and kind of rejuvenate that grease if you use the oscillation. I never really use the oscillation, so I'm not worried about it. And when you put it back in, you want to try to avoid getting that grease in the bearing. It's pretty much impossible, but do the best you can to avoid getting the grease on there. Okay, so that's back in place. And we'll do the same thing on the front, a little bit of oil. Start from where it's going to first slide down. We'll slip this back in, again being very careful of the windings, not hit any of the sharp metal edges. Okay. Now we'll reconnect this here, this oscillations arm. Oh, I guess nothing sits in. And this is a reverse thread screw, so we're going to loosen it to tighten it, which is kind of confusing. This grease is kind of dried up and sticky in there. If you use the oscillation, it doesn't hurt to put a drop of oil on there too. Okay, so we're ready to close this motor back up again. Replace the 4 screws that came out before. I'm not going to tighten every single screw just yet. Just put it in there all the way, and then I'll tighten them all at the end symmetrically. These don't have to go very tight, but it's important that they tighten evenly. Okay, so I've got all of them in there. And I usually just go, whoops, I won't do that. Screwed up the camera. I usually just go like 2-finger tight on these. That's good enough. Okay, so now you may notice that the shaft is stiffer than it was before. This is normal, no need to get upset. We'll just take a screwdriver, strike it a couple times, and that'll align the bearings and free it right up. You kind of take it and move it back and forward, up and down, all over the place a little bit, and it'll loosen up and be fine. Alright, so we're ready to reassemble now. Put the oil away. I only get oil over the rest of the fan, so I'm going to clean my hand off a little bit. I'm going to put the thing back onto the stand now. Before I screw everything back together, I'm going to plug it up and just make sure that it's still running. It is. First thing I'll put back on is the rear motor housing. Okay, and the switch can go back. Only fits on one way. Oh, you know what? Before I go any further, let me put this back in. It would have been more ideal to put this back in while it was still on the bench, because I got to tap it in now. Usually these aren't quite this difficult to work with. This one is very difficult to work with. I don't know why it's so hard. And you just hit it in until it's pretty much centered like that. Okay. Put the front on. Okay, next will be the rear guard. And this is just plastic thread, so this does not go very tight. Just goes enough to snug it in place, and that is it. No tighter than that. That slot is where that metal thing, that pin lines up with. And this should go on a little bit easier now that I had sanded down the shaft a bit. And the spin down time is very good now. Bearings are very free. This is reverse threaded. That does not go very tight either. Okay, and now the guard goes back. And then we'll have to tighten that screw up. Which is the same procedure as with undoing it, just inverted. And this does not have to go very tight either, just enough to start to close that gap a little bit so you can't open the guard without it being loosened. You don't really have to go until it stops, just enough so that it won't open up anymore. Okay, let's plug it back up and check it out, see how it's running now. Should be running better than it was before. Start with the low. Okay, the medium. It's kind of out of balance. It's not terrible, but it's not great. And the high. Yeah, I probably should balance. I'm not going to do that today. I don't feel like it, but At some point I'll probably balance it. You can see the blade is completely out of clock. That's probably part of why it's out of balance. Right, the bearings are very free and it's running good, so this is ready to go into service.